There's an expression that's common in today's parenting lexicon. You've probably heard it, little people, big feelings. It refers to the idea that young children, though physically small, experience powerful, sometimes overwhelming emotions: anger, frustration, sadness, anxiety. These emotions often surface at times of transition: mealtime, bath time, bedtime, potty time, time to get dressed, time to go out, or at unpredictable moments, such as when a favorite stuffy has mysteriously disappeared, or when sharing a toy is required, or when someone innocently sits down on the couch without realizing that it's actually an underwater pirate cavern. At such moments, children express the emotions that are surging through their little bodies, not through reasoned discourse, but through the time-honored language of toddlers: crying, yelling, screaming, sometimes hitting, kicking, and hair-pulling. How do I know about this? Don't ask. At such moments, what's a parent to do? Yelling back is not encouraged by parenting experts. We're not supposed to descend to the level of our little one. Instead, we're instructed to help our children articulate their emotion in words, teach them how to manage their big feelings, and calm down. We're supposed to remain the adult in the room: calm, confident, compassionate, always in control. Lots of deep breathing is recommended for everyone. And it helps to remember that the toddler stage doesn't last forever, though I've heard that they eventually turn into something called teenagers. Let's face it, mastering our emotions is hard, even for grown-ups. Faced with a defiant little one, it's easy to lose our cool, and there are so many other situations that test our ability to regulate our big feelings: sitting in traffic when we're running late, sitting on hold forever while we navigate bureaucracy, dealing with an unpleasant neighbor, a difficult relative, or a stressful situation at work, reading an obnoxious post on social media, watching the news. This very real challenge reminds me of, wait for it, this week's Torah portion. It's a familiar story. Moshe is by himself out in the wilderness, under the tranquil desert sky, surrounded by nothing but sheep. There's not an annoying relative or a persecuting Pharaoh in sight. Suddenly, he spies a burning bush. He turns to look more closely, and a voice addresses him from the midst of the flames, and the rest is history, our history. Now, we usually talk about this story from the perspective of Moshe's character. He is alert and curious enough to notice a strange phenomenon that others might have overlooked. He is so humble and self-effacing that he resists God's call to become a liberator. But I started thinking about a different character in the story: the bush. The bush is on fire, but it doesn't burn up. As the Torah says, einenu ukal, it was not consumed, or more literally, it was not eaten up by the flames. And I thought about what it means to tolerate a fiery situation without burning up or burning out. There's a book by Larry Dressler, who I've never met him, but I've read, serves as a consultant to rabbis, called Standing in the Fire. The book is actually about how to conduct a meeting in a difficult situation. But the phrase describes the challenge we all face so often in our daily lives, and especially now with all that's going on: resurgent COVID, rampant anti-Semitism, suffering and death in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, another horrific school shooting, a presidential campaign heating up, and of course the ongoing threat of climate change. And here in our own community, a planned walkout at the high school, a contentious school board meeting, competing public gatherings by people who hold very different views on Israel. Again and again, life tests our ability to sustain ourselves in the midst of the heat. Big emotions threaten to overwhelm us. We're on the verge of tears, on the verge of rage. Our blood boils, our cheeks burn, our hearts race, our fists clench. How will we stand here in the fire, day after day, week after week? As the climate of discourse heats up in our own community and our country, how will we avoid being consumed by the flames? Our sages ask why God chose to address Moshe from the midst of a bush. Why not choose a more appropriate vehicle for this miracle? Why not choose a lofty cedar tree or a beautiful sycamore? Well, for one thing, God works with what's available in the wilderness. But Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha offers another beautiful response. God chose a lowly, ordinary bush in order to teach us she'ein makom panui belo shchina, afilu sneh, that there's no empty place of the Shekhinah, God's divine presence, not even a bush. God resides everywhere. The sacred is accessible not only in beautiful sunsets and mountains and forests, but in the most ordinary pedestrian situations. My toddler may be having a meltdown, but I can remind myself that he's a miracle and I love him more than life itself. As Moshe was alert to signs of the holy, even in a desolate wilderness, we should search out and cherish every moment of beauty and goodness that we can find in this desperate time. There are friends and family who love us despite our many failings. There are quiet, restorative moments in nature. The news may be full of violence and horror, but there are also heroes who run toward the fire, acting with selfless courage to save others. We can be inspired by them even as we grieve, and we have to search for such moments lest we be consumed by rage or despair. The bush was ablaze, but it didn't burn up. Rabbi Eliezer taught in another midrash that just as the bush burns in fire but is not consumed, so too the Egyptians will be unable to eradicate Israel. For our sages, the bush was a symbol of the Jewish people and our resilience in the face of oppression. The great American Jewish poet Charles Reznikoff wrote these words in a poem called In Memoriam, 1933. You have seen a bush beside the road, whose leaves the passing beasts pluck at, and whose twigs are sometimes broken by a wheel, and yet it flourishes, because the roots are sound. Such a heavy wheel is Rome, these Romans, all the legions of the East, from Egypt and Syria, the islands of the sea and the rivers of Parthia, gathered here to trample down Jerusalem. When they have become a legend and Rome a fable that old men will tell of in the city's gate, the tellers will be Jews and their speech Hebrew. 1933 was the year that Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Charles Reznikoff, responding to that event, remembered that the Jewish people had survived the devastating might of the Roman Empire and every attempt to destroy us throughout history. He placed his faith in the quiet, persistent strength that endures, the bush by the side of the road, low and humble, but still there, generation after generation, despite everything. Even in his own dark time, he believed that we would prevail and continue to tell our story, speaking in the ancient language of our forebears. When you're in the wilderness, you have to work with what's available, so we can hold fast to what we find here and now, rooted in our tradition, searching for sacred and beautiful moments, believing in our own strength and resilience. We can take long, deep breaths, give and receive hugs, and ask for help when we need it. We can and we must do everything possible to sustain ourselves. We can remind ourselves that even here, even now, there are miracles right in front of our eyes. We can stand in the midst of the fire as long as we have to, and we will not be consumed. Shabbat Shalom.